find. I don't really know what all this is. Youth rally will be tomorrow. Yeah, I'm a week off. And then business meeting the week after that. Yes, that's about all that's on this. Do we have any prayer requests? Remember this? Any others? Any others? Brother Keith, can you lead us in word of prayer?
All right, so Brianna, what song are we gonna do next? One, two, three. All right, what was that at? What's that? Good choice.
Good choice, man.
say it was? chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1. Austin called me. I told him this week, I said, man, with everything going on, I said, won't you just take Sunday off and rest and relax? And he said, no, I'm going to be there. And he called me this afternoon. He said, would you mind preaching tonight? And he's got a lot going on and everything. And so immediately, right into my mind went immediately to Daniel. And Daniel chapter 1 and dealing with compromise. We live in a world of compromise that we have to make. And the Webster's Dictionary defines compromise as a settlement of differences by mutual concessions, an agreement reached by adjustment of conflicting or opposing claims, principles, etc., by reciprocal modification of demands. And so it's settlement of differences by mutual concessions or an agreement reached by the adjustment of conflicting and opposing claims. We all face compromise every single day of our life. And, you know, some compromises, some decisions that we make aren't that big of a deal. But some decisions that we make in life are a real big deal. Matter of fact, they have consequences and stuff that will determine even into the future your usefulness or not. In Daniel chapter 1, we're introduced to 4 different guys, and they go down in history because of Daniel chapter 1. How many of you have heard of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Right? And then you look at Daniel, and Daniel, if you look at him and his effectiveness, we would not even have a lot of the prophecies, and a lot of the prophecies that we have about Jesus Christ's return would not even make sense had it not been for Daniel. And there's some parts of prophecy that God told Daniel not to even tell. And I'm like, I wish that he would have been like most Baptists and just spilled his guts. But no, he kept it quiet, and so we won't know until we get there. But all of this happened, and the reason that we're so familiar today with Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel is because at the very beginning they didn't compromise. They made a decision in their life. And so there's always going to be times in our life that we're going to have to make the determination, am I going to do the right thing, or am I going to compromise and just go along with the crowd? And Daniel is a good example of this. And so notice, first of all, as we look at verse 1 through 7 tonight, we see the problems. Daniel and his 3 buddies are in a world of hurt. If you remember, this is written now. They've gone into captivity. They're in Babylonian captivity, and all of these young guys from the Jews and stuff have been taken away. They've been brought into the castle, and it says in verse 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, and part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah of Shadrach, and Mishael of Meshach, and Azariah of Abednego. And so notice these Hebrew boys faced several problems, and every problem that they faced had the potential to derail them and lead them off into some spiritual tangent, somewhere out of where God wanted them and needed them to be. And so they faced some problems, and their problems were not a whole lot different than the problems that you and I face today. We see in verse 1 and 2 that they were given a new home. They lived in Jerusalem, but now they've been taken into captivity. Now they've been brought to Babylon, that is there, and they've been placed into this role, into this temple, and all of these sacrifices that was there, all of these gods that they worship, and they have basically become slaves. And they have a new home and new surroundings that's there. But then if you look in verse 3 and 4, they were also given new knowledge. It says in verse 3, the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And so they got the brightest and fairest. They kind of got the pick of the Hebrew litter, and they brought them into the castle that they might brainwash them, that they might change them, that they might teach them new things. And so they were taught the language of the Chaldeans. They were taught about the worship of the Chaldeans with all of these gods. They were taught about the culture of the Chaldeans. And so they were exposed to all of these things. And can you imagine what they must have been feeling and what they have been going, or what they were going through, especially knowing the laws and everything of the Hebrew people that was there. And can you imagine being told over and over that the God of Israel is an old God? He's way back here. He's outdated. He's no longer relevant for us today. And all the things that the kings and these guys was telling them and feeding them, kind of like in our society today. Even though we know things have been proven to be false, our schools and education are still just pumping that information into our kids and trying to tell them that the Bible is not necessary, that we don't need to listen to God or anything else. And because of that, look at where our society is. I mean, you think about homosexuality, you think about alcohol, cursing, all of this promiscuous sexual activity and everything else. And the one thing that I do know is over 4,000 years from the time that Daniel wrote this, that God has not changed his mind. It's been our minds that have been changed on all of this. And we give a little bit, and what happens? Satan takes a lot. And we just go further and further down this wormhole the quicker that we can go. And so not only did he give them a new home and he gave them new knowledge, but he also gave them a new diet. It says in verse 5, the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now, when we read that, we don't think much about it when he talks about the daily provisions of the king. But understand, when we're talking about the daily provisions of the king's meat and the wine that he drank, most all of this come off of the sacrifices. The stuff that wasn't consumed, the stuff that wasn't completely burned on the altars and on these sacrifices, the stuff that was given was brought into the king's house for him to feast on and for everybody else. And so, man, what have they done? They have been under this strict Jewish diet that says that there's clean things and unclean things. And we're not supposed to eat these unclean things. And now they're being offered all of this. And not only was it not clean, but it had been also offered to these other gods and stuff that was there. And so when we think about it, you know, they were there in this new diet and this new opportunity and everything else. But notice that they are guarded. Notice that even though it has been offered to them, they have the choice to compromise, but they don't seem to do that. And we'll see that here in just a minute in verse 8. But notice what verse 6 says. Because they were also given new names. And this is kind of neat. It says, now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And unto the prince of the eunuchs gave names, and he gave unto Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah of Shadrach, to Mishael of Meshach, and Azariah of Abednego. And so when they come to Babylon, they come in with these great names. And I don't know why. I've asked myself, because I do it too. Why in the world do we keep Daniel's Hebrew name when we always talk about him, but we always take Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, their Chaldean, their Babylonian name, over their spiritual name? And I don't know. I guess just because from there on out, Daniel's writing, and he refers to them in the next chapters in their Chaldean names. But these names mean something. Daniel's name meant God is my judge. Hananiah was God is gracious. Mishael was God is without equal. And then the name Azariah is the Lord is my helper. And they arrive in Babylon, and now they are giving new names. The king is trying to take and change their identity, change who they are and what they represent. And so Daniel's name, who meant God is my judge, now becomes Belteshazzar. And Belteshazzar means Baal will protect. And so instead of God being his judge, Baal will protect you. And so you see he's taken them from the God of Israel to these other false gods. And the same thing happens with Hananiah, whose name means God is gracious. He changed to Shadrach, which means the inspiration of the sun. And so instead of God as gracious and thinking about the grace of God, we get our inspiration from the sun. And that's what you need to remember. The sun is what feeds and takes care of us. And then you have Mishael, who is God without equal, and they change his name to Meshach, which means belonging to Aku, another god that was there. And Azariah, the Lord is my helper, they change his name to Abednego, a servant of Nego, another god. And so what Nebuchadnezzar was trying to do was trying to change their identity. He was trying to make them something that they were not. And hopefully in the process of changing them, he's going to change their thinking. He's going to change their mind, because he's wanting to put these guys in charge of the other human people. If he can get the best of Israel to compromise, he's going to have no problem getting the rest to compromise. And so that's the process. That's what he is trying to do right here. But it is plain to see as you read the book of Daniel that even though their names were changed, their character remained steadfast. They didn't allow the name change to affect them. And how much does the world today try to fit us into their mold? They try to make us look and act and seem like them. They try to take what we represent and who we are and move us into another culture. In 1 John chapter 3, John writes, "Behold, what manner of love the Father hath bestowed on us, that we should be called the sons of God. Therefore the world kneweth us not, because it knew him not. Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is." We must never forget that we are the twice born children of the living God. And so, man, we are born into his family. We are his children. We represent him. And as we go through this life, we're constantly going to be tempted by the enemy to get us to lay down our guard, to get us to conform to this world, to get us to leave and forget our identity. And that's what we've been talking about in Colossians this whole time, is our identity is not in this church. Your identity is not in me as pastor. Your identity is in Jesus Christ. And so that's where our identity's at. So that's where our character comes from, and that's where our witness comes from. And so when we conform to the world standards, we do these things, and we know it's wrong. But there's going to be times of testing. There's going to be times of trials and tribulations. And the thing is we have to make up our mind that when the compromise comes and the compromise hits, that we can weather safely and secure the image that God has made us into. We see these four men that they're at Babylon, and will help us when we are faced with the crossroads of life. And so that's kind of the background of what was trying to be done. That was the effect of the compromise and what they were trying to do. But then notice the purpose, because here's the key to the whole entire chapter is in verse 8, and it starts off with the word "but." This is what the king tried to get them to do. This is what the king tried. He gave them a new home. He gave them new knowledge. He gave them a new diet and all of these things. But notice what happened with Daniel in verse 8. The dedication in his heart. It says, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor of the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." And you know, that's kind of a unique deal. And as I was reading through it again this afternoon, it just kind of, we always focus in on Daniel purposed in his heart, right? He's not going to compromise. But he didn't tell the king, "I'm not going to eat your stinking filthy meat." That's not his attitude. Look at what he said there, because this phrase just jumped out at me. He said, "Therefore he requested." He requested. may I please. When we're dealing, sometimes we as Christians can take the Bible and we can be too harsh. We can be not of the right spirit. I remember Jesus Christ said that we should be harmless as a dove, but wise as a serpent. Know when to attack and when just to be careful and to take it easy. And he's in somebody else's territory. He's in somebody else's possession. He's a slave now. And so he didn't just go up in here demanding his rights, but yet he requested. But notice the resolve that is there. And, you know, it would have been easy to say, well, it's all right. All the other guys are doing it. Or man, we had better do that, what the king says, or he's going to kill us. And we could come up with all these excuses and all of these things that they had. But yet when Daniel looked at all of these options, of a new home, a new knowledge, new diet, he looked at these options and they were not good enough for him because he had a faith. He had a faith in God and he had a responsibility of God. And he really wasn't worried about the consequences. He wasn't thinking about what is the king going to do to me. And folks, we need that same determined commitment. I think a lot of times in life today, we do a lot of looking at what the end result is rather than just obeying Jesus Christ. Instead of just saying, you know, nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. But when we say that, it might be leading us to our death. It might not be leading us to what we think we're getting. But yet God has a plan and God has a purpose. And our duty, our responsibility is to deny ourselves, take up our cross daily, and follow Him. And so they had this determination, but then in verse 9 we see their desire. Remember in verse 7, Daniel requested of the people in the king's palace. And then in verse 9 it says, now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of eunuchs. See, Daniel made up his mind what he was going to do, and then he trusted God to take care of the rest. You catch that? See, Daniel requested of the king, but who was working in the background? Daniel didn't have a chance with the king. He didn't have a chance with these other eunuchs, but what happened? God was working in the background. Because of his determination not to compromise, look at what God said. God brought him into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. And then look at verse 10. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink, for why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall you make me endanger my head to the king. In verse 11, then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, as you look at us, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days. And so in an effort to maintain their ceremonial purity before the Lord, and that's what they were doing. It wasn't about eating the meat. They didn't want to become ceremonially unclean because they're now in this place with these other gods. They're offering this meat and stuff that has been worshipped to the gods and sacrificed to the gods. And so they requested that they not be forced to eat the king's meat. Is there another option? Is there something else that we can do? And so they knew that when they ate this food, they would be defiled. They knew that their bodies would be defiled because the food was defiled. And so they were asked to eat pulse. Basically, it's beans and vegetables. It's just a vegetable. One thing, as I was reading that and looking up the pulse's beans, which is a vegetable, you never see them offering vegetables to God. It's always meat. It's always that stuff. And so he said, let us have the stuff that's not being worshipped to God. That's the idea, to your gods that are there. And just give us water to drink. We don't want your wine that you've been pouring on altars and all of this stuff. Just give us simple water and do this for a 10-day period. It's not always the easiest thing to do what's right. It's not always the easiest thing to do the most popular thing with your stand for God, but it's always the right thing to do. It's always the right thing to do if we're willing to stand our ground before the Lord. And when we do that, He will honor and bless us. Matthew 6:33. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and what? All these other things shall be added unto you. And so Daniel purposed in his mind, and then God took over, and He made this request. And so, when we think about us, when you look at this thing, you go on and you read in chapter 3, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into the fiery furnace. This was not just a determination that they changed or they wavered on. They were willing to die for what they believed in. And so He said, throw us into the fire. Daniel, if you go look, Daniel, 80 years later, at the age of around 90 years old, Daniel was told not to pray to God. But he did anyway. You remember he was cast into the lion's den? He says, well, you know what? I'm so convinced that God's going to take care of this that, guess what? Go ahead and kill me if that's what you need. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, guess what? When Nebuchadnezzar looked in, he saw 4 guys there because Jesus was walking in the midst. When Daniel got thrown into the lion's den, Nebuchadnezzar had an awful night, you remember, and finally he comes out the next day, and what? Daniel's still there because the lions never opened their mouth that night. And that kind of gets me to the answer ask myself when I'm looking at these scriptures and I'm trying to do, am I so easily ready to compromise my walk with God? And am I consistent enough in my walk with God that I would be willing to die? To put my beliefs on the line when facing life and death. And the hard thing is be honest, but probably not. If we're honest with ourselves, and none of us can say, I will do that, and I've learned from reading Scripture, I'm not going to be bold enough to say, well, it's never going to happen. I'd always choose death over life, but Peter didn't, did he? He said, Lord, I'll die with you, but then when it came down to it, he denied them. And so I know the human flesh. I know that reality and what's there. But yet we compromise so many different ways in our life in everything that we do. But notice Daniel and them, the reason they were consistent is because they purposed in their heart. They already made up their mind what was going to happen when it came to compromise. And when you look at their dedication, it's really summed up in 2 words. That's really what I define as one word. If you summed it up in 1 word, it would be faith. If you summed it up in 2 words, it would be trust and obedience, which is the definition of faith. In other words, they trusted their God, and so what happened? They obeyed. Don't let us get involved into this king's meat. Don't let us get involved with these gods and deities. And so they were willing to trust God, to do what He promised, and they were willing to follow Him no matter what it cost them. And that's what Jesus said. If you want to be my disciple, follow me. What? Deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and follow me. And so, man, we have to be willing to follow regarding the cost. The men, we looked a couple of weeks ago at the parables of the cost, thinking about the cost. What is it? What was going to cost you to serve Jesus Christ? That's there. And then we come to verse 17 through 21, and we see that this promotion that they get. Because of their determination, God promotes them. First of all, notice the experience that at the end of the 10 days in verse 15, it said their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. 10 days, there was a noticeable difference between them and everybody else. And so look at what it says in verse 16. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink and gave them pulse. Daniel's experiment worked. Because he didn't compromise, God honored his word, and these men were healthier, they were wiser than all of the others. They knew something that so many of us in life never do get. And it's this: if we will do as God says, He will never fail us. He'll never leave us. He'll never forsake us. He will be with us through the fire. He will be with us in the lion's den. He will be with us in every single thing. But we have to be faithful to Him. We have to honor Him in His word. Come what may, we have to count and trust on the Lord. And then you look at verse 17. And these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince and the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. Now, how long did this process take? Well, you go back up to the first of the chapter. Remember, the king said, do this for 3 years. 3 years. And so it has been a 3-year process that they have gone and they've been eating the pulse, drinking the water. And at the end of the 3 years, now they are brought before the king. And the king looks at them and said, to make his resolve, is this working out? How's this going? And they stood before the king. And when the king began to interview and ask them questions, they were wiser and smarter than every one of his own astrologers and magicians that was there. Of course, we know that that's what should happen anyway, right? Because the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom and the beginning of knowledge. And so as we look at this story, it reminds us that God honors those that honor him. It doesn't teach that serving God faithfully will make you smart. This is not teaching that if you follow God and you serve God that you will be attractive or that you'll even be famous. But what it does teach us is that serving God has with it the benefits of God promoting us, of God lifting us up. He said, if I will be lifted up, I will draw all men. If you humble yourself in the hands of God, he said, I will raise you up. And so we see this being played out in Daniel and his 3 friends. But notice in verse 21, and Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. Now, we're not told how long Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego served before going to Babylon. We don't know. We've got an estimation, but after the fiery furnace, they're not really mentioned no more. And Daniel kind of picks up and takes over the story. But we do know how long it was for Daniel. When we look at when Nebuchadnezzar, when they went into captivity, and you look at this now, there's been over 70 years. And Daniel is now entering the age of 90. Right at around 90 years old when he was thrown into the lion's den. And so all of these years, nearly 70 plus years, he has faithfully served the Lord. And look at what happened. God gave him a long life. Do you remember, you know what the only commandment with a promise is? Honor your mother and father that your days may be what? Long. He says those of us that serve him, there's a long life. There's a long service. And so not only does God give us life spiritually, but he gives us life physically that's there. And so if we always seek and honor him, he's going to consistently bless us and use us for his glory. And so God is simply looking for vessels that are willing. And so when we come to compromises, when we come to the things of the day, and I'm going to wrap up with a passage of Scripture from 2 Timothy chapter 2, where Paul is his final letter that he wrote. He's writing to young Timothy, his protege, and he's basically telling him, I fought a good fight, I finished my course, right? But I'm leaving this for you. I'm leaving the next generation into your hands. And he tells them in chapter 2 and verse 20, he says, Timothy, in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and of silver, but also of wood and of earth, some to honor and some to dishonor. If a man therefore purge himself from these, he shall be a vessel of honor, sanctified and meet for the master's use, and prepared unto every good work. It's not what we are on the outside, it's who we are on the inside that gives us honor. And that's what he says there. If we will purge ourselves and sanctify ourselves to God, guess what? We can become a vessel of honor. And I can promise you guys, as we go and we look at life and we see life today and this world and the wickedness and everything else, there are going to be many, many opportunities for compromise. It's getting more and more frequent in our society today. And the question is are we going to make up our mind? That's what we've been talking about in Colossians. That's what we talked about in Philippians. We talked about in Ephesians that what? Everything is controlled in our mind. We have to make up our mind, and Daniel purposed in his heart that he was not going to defile himself. What are you going to purpose in your heart? What is it in your life, whether it's TV, whether it's radio, whether it's magazines, no matter what it is, maybe it's the social media, maybe it's something on your phone. What is it that is defiling your heart that you can make the decision right now, you know what, I'm just not going to allow that to defile me. I'm going to make up my mind that I'm going to get up and turn it off, turn it over, get rid of it so that I can serve God, because we are bombarded by so much disgusting stuff in our society today. And we're seeing the Christian, we're not becoming great lights, we're becoming darker and dimmer. And we need to shine. We need to be different from everybody else. And that's what Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and them stand out, and they were a beacon in a dark, dark civilization and society. You can go in and you can look at the Babylonians and all of their worship and the things that they did. They were an evil society, and they were placed there, but yet they still shined for God. And we can do the same thing, but it happens if we purpose in our hearts. As we stand and we have a verse of invitation tonight. Conquering compromise. If we as Christians could just figure that one out, our churches, our Christ would look a lot different in the world that's out there. As we sing, what hymn?